Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 489, featuring AJ Wedding, who is the co-founder and chief creative officer over at Orbital Virtual Studios. Got a long talk with AJ, really cool guy. We got to spend a lot of time at Orbital, which I'll get to in a bit. But he started his career in visual effects, which is pretty common, I guess, but got involved in virtual production through things like Mandalorian, and decided to build his own stage and start his own company called Orbital or Virtual Studios downtown Los Angeles, which is really cool because we actually got to spend several days there shooting Ray Tracing for the Win. Yes, a lot of the entire short that we had done was almost all shot over at Orbital. We was a 3-day shoot over there and a quite amazing experience to be able to kick the tires on Project Arena. So really cool to be able to talk to him about that, including just, virtual production at large and all the impacts it's going to have, including all kinds of other things that we talked about, AI, you name it. We talked about all of it. So really cool to be able to talk to him about that. Speaking of Ray Tracing for the Win, the short is now out. If you haven't seen it yet this week, you can definitely go check it out. It is on our homepage. Just go to chaos.com, but you can just go to YouTube and look up Ray Tracing for the Win or Ray Tracing FTW. And yeah, it's kind of out there everywhere now, and really, really a lot of fun to do it. If you guys don't know much about it, is essentially a sequel to the short we made called our V-Ray IRL, and it was a lot of fun. It really sort of kicks off a lot of what was sort of special about Project Arena, which is a huge Chaos Innovation Lab project that I've been working very, very closely with the incredible developers over on the Innovation Lab. So now that it's out and it's public, there is going to be a behind the scenes stuff that's going to come out. But I do want to mention on this podcast very specifically, I want to have some big, big thank you to the developers who had helped make a lot of this stuff work, especially the stuff that happened in Project Arena. There were people that were working around the clock to make sure that software was up to snuff for what we needed to do on stage. And that was a lot of fun. And I do want to give a very special thank you also to Vlado, who has been sort of championing this, not just on the technology side of things, but also on the creative side of things, sort of making sure that we would be able to accomplish this. And it was amazing to be able to do this project. Clearly the biggest project I'd ever done at Chaos, and really kind of amazing to do that. So also incredible to be able to shoot over at Orbital, which is kind of the reason I decided I want to have AJ on now that we can finally start talking about these things a little bit more. So really, really cool. We do have one event that's going to be happening coming up soon. Just go to chaos.com/events. September 19th, we are going to be in Berlin for Chaos Unbox. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. Just go to chaos.com/events. Again, that is chaos.com/events. Now, if you guys want to know more about the podcast, you guys know what to do. You just go to chaos.com/CG Garage. If you want to follow us on Facebook, it is facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast. If you'd like to follow us on YouTube, we actually post all of our podcasts on YouTube, including this one, and it's going to be youtube.com/Chaos Group TV. Again, youtube.com/Chaos Group TV. If you have ideas of other podcasts you'd like us to do, we'd like to respond to a lot of your requests, and we've been getting some great ones. Just email us, labs@chaos.com. Again, that is labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 489 with AJ Wedding.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
So cool. Listen, AJ, it's been awesome to have you on. Awesome having you on. I am extremely excited to talk to you. I obviously want to talk about Orbital and talk to you about the great experiences that we had over there. But before we do that, let's get a little background into you. Like, how did you get into the visual effects world, and what inspired you to start your own virtual production studio?
I ask myself that question every day.
Yeah.
No, I've been around in production in various positions for 24 years.
Right.
Starting in development at Paramount and just kind of going all over the place. Really, I just love the industry, and I've always kind of chased the things that were most exciting to me at the time. I'd say somewhere around 2010, I was really into visual effects. So I started sort of teaching myself. I ended up working for a brief time at New Deal Studios.
Oh, okay.
Which was a really eye-opening and great experience, because what a great team. And also they're taking sort of the time-tested techniques and then merging them with the technology, which was a great thing for the time. Because at the time you couldn't do a very photorealistic CG model. So creating physical models and then scanning them and that sort of thing was providing better results. And so that was great for me. I just love learning those techniques. And always been a filmmaker, always been, directing commercials and things like that along the way. And
did you go to school for that, or?
I did not. I was an actor, so I went to school for musical theater performance.
Wow.
And,
okay.
Yeah, so I can tap dance with the best of them, but not on this podcast. So no, I just really was into making things my whole life. I think. Right. Even in high school, I was making videos instead of term papers if they would let me, and it took me 3 times the amount of time, but I loved it. So, but basically, when I started hearing about what was going on over at Lucasfilm, I was able to get involved a little bit because some friends of mine were still making miniatures, and they were still using those at the time there. And I got to go see it. And walking into an LED volume for the first time, for me, was a religious experience. And I just remember thinking, this is going to change everything. And
what was the thing that what did you see? What was the project they were working on back then?
They called it Project Huckleberry.
Okay.
But it was the Mandalorian.
Right. Okay.
And
what year was this approximately?
Oh man. Now you're gonna date me.
Was it 2018 or?
It was 2018. That's right, because it was pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And I had gotten attached to a movie that I was going to be visual effects supervisor on that was going to require technology like this. After I saw it, I was like, "Oh, this is a great use for that." So
sure. I
started digging deeper into it, and the more people I spoke to who had worked with it, there were a lot of people who had bad experiences, and of course, my first thought is, okay, well, why? Because this seems like the future. And, really just hearing out what people had to say and all the things that didn't work. It was such a nascent time for this stuff. They were literally just putting all those pieces together for the first time.
Sure.
And the fact that it worked at all is pretty amazing. So, learning that, hey, if we can make the panels better for what we want for cinematographers, what they want to do, if we can make the tracking faster, if we can make the assets perform faster or be better looking, all of those things were problems that we decided to tackle. And we started tackling them in my garage in 2020 during the pandemic lockdown. The panel manufacturer, Planar, was interested in getting some feedback because they really wanted into that market that Ro was really dominating.
Sure.
And really they listened to everything that they had time on their hands too, I guess.
Yeah.
But they really listened to what we had to say and made a lot of changes that made a better system. And the more I realized that people were really interested in making it better and improving all these things, it just almost naturally came together as a company. We had a small space at Fonco Studios. My friend Fawn Davis, who also used to work at New Deal and Lucasfilm prior to that. And from there, we showcased it. We made people sort of understand what was going on, because there's still a lot of producers who don't understand this stuff. And
sure.
Eventually got investors to move into this space that we're in now with several stages and a lot of mobile operations, which is the biggest part of what we do. So yeah, it kind of snowballed really quickly after the pandemic.
Right. I mean, the pandemic itself was a lot of things like, oh, this is going to save Hollywood, right? And
that was our first job, was basically the show Snowfall. There was a very location heavy show, and it's a show that takes place in the 1980s. So they were having a real hard time figuring out how they were going to shoot. So by taking a third of their location days and putting them in a stage, just by putting up LED walls and doing some, minor virtual production, we saved them. I mean, they were able to do the show, number one. Right. Number two, it looked, the quality of it was very good. And then also they saved, I think, $500,000 that season. So and that was with COVID. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's the promise, right? Is that you can save location costs that are in there. Location costs are I want to get into the economics of that. Location costs are actually high, but also it's not necessarily that, LED volumes are not necessarily cheap to rent either, are they? Right?
Absolutely. I mean, if let's say Snowfall was going to come to Orbital Studios, right? It's basically a location day for them. So they're not really saving money. Right. If we can come to them and they're not having to move all their crew, I think the round number that was given to me about what it takes to get the crew over to a location was around $35,000 a day. That's just to move the people. That's not even the cost of location or setting up base camp. Right. So that right there is sort of number one part of the savings. LA obviously you have a lot higher location costs than say, Texas or Atlanta. Sure. But it is one of those things. It's a good thing to weigh against. A lot of people are saying, people say this saves money, but it seems expensive. And I would say we're probably not one of the most expensive versions of it, but at the same time, you're not going to save millions of dollars. You are going to have really high quality look and a lot of control over the environment that you're shooting in that you wouldn't have on a location. So let's talk a little bit about Orbital. Obviously, you guys came around to building this. What is it like to sort of build that? How does it start? How do you sort of say, okay, I'm going to build this studio and I'm going to start marketing this as a place to do it? I would love to say that it was super fun and super easy, and yeah. I mean, the good news is, I've had years and years of building great friendships with people in the industry. So I had very highly qualified people around me that we were all trying to go for the same goal, which is let's make the best system that we can for virtual production. And that goal was shared by everybody. So we always saw the light at the end of the tunnel. It was not exactly easy. Number one, nobody knows who we are. We're nobody in particular. Sure. And
you're independent, really, right? You're not.
Absolutely. We're independent. And we don't belong to a VFX company that's a large company. So it really was kind of like,
or a studio.
Who are these guys? Exactly.
Right.
And even just finding a building in Los Angeles that's big enough to do this is hard enough. Right. I think we had a lot of faith from our investors, which, without them, we wouldn't be here. Right. And I think they see what I see, which is that long term, this is going to get adopted on a huge scale. Which we're already starting to see in sort of the car commercial market, which is kind of the easiest kind of low-hanging fruit. Right. But yeah, we bought equipment that ended up being duds. We've, gone down paths that we thought were going to be the future, and turns out they were not. Sure. And, there's so much to it as far as, you're building out, one, a facility, two, the most advanced filmmaking technology ever made. Right. And then software, which, has its own challenges. And there's probably 35 or 40 different softwares in this building that all have to work together. And then there's the sort of data center of it all for managing all of that and keeping all of the computers synced. So, I dye my hair now, but it's very, very gray when it's not dyed, mostly because of building the Orbital Studios.
Right. Yeah. It's got to be really tough, right? I think there's obviously, there was a big, hype when during the pandemic because of virtual production. And I think that hype might have died down, but the demand has not necessarily gone away, right? There's still a very much an important part of what virtual production is about, that I think people are do you feel that they're more like in tune to like, I'm using it the right way, as opposed to, I'm just going to use it as a Hail Mary to save my project because I can't shoot because it's COVID, right?
That's a good point. No, I think, especially in the case of Snowfall, it was maybe a Hail Mary to save the show. But then once everybody got used to it, it was like, oh man, we're never doing it without that anymore.
Right.
And the producers even brought us onto another show in Chicago that they were doing, which was Justified. And, once you get used to it and it becomes part of your normal budgeting process and visual process, I think everybody loves it. I mean, the DPs, I think what they love, even if you're doing something as simple as just video plates, the fact that, we can give a DP 30 choices for the sky. Imagine normally out the window, you're going to have, 2 photographs, one is city day, one is city night.
Sure.
And those are your choices.
Right.
Now you have unlimited amounts of possibilities. And
right.
I think that really helps them craft their image, and they love that. So,
yeah, I got to say our experience at Orbital for working on our short was kind of a great one. First of all, I got to commend you guys, because you gave me a very skeleton crew because you had no choice, because you guys were all going to NAB at the time. So I had
apologies for that.
That's no problem. This is exactly what I say. The fact is, you guys gave us some very talented people that were just there and solved problems for us that were really, really great. So our experience at Orbital was actually fantastic. I got to say, it was really, really cool. And it just worked. It worked gorgeously. And it was really kind of nice to be able to have Project Arena sort of running there and be able to see that. And it was exactly what you were just saying, like Richard was able to say, I just move that light, move this. And then it's like, oh, now I don't have to think about it. It's just the way it is. That experience of when people realize that the filmmakers have control of the CG again.
Yes, it's no longer in a box later that somebody else is dealing with.
Right.
I remember listening to some of the Marvel filmmakers at a panel, and they were like, well, that the third act is something that goes to ILM, and then we see it in 6 months. Like how do you do that?
Right.
I would go nuts.
Yeah, I used to think about that. It's like, no wonder filmmakers hated CG, because they would just film things in a big blue volume and see it in 6 months, 9 months, and hope for the best. Like, it's just very sad, right?
It's a really good point that essentially, as high a technology as it is,
right,
it's bringing you back to that the director has to make a decision.
Right.
And that makes for better filmmaking.
Sure.
And there's also that sort of, a cinematographer can find some nuance in the shot as well. One of the first things that a friend of mine worked on, which was semi-virtual production, Ian Hunter, who I used to work for at Orbital Studios, he did First Man. And on First Man, they had, the spaceship and then a big LED wall behind it. And there were moments where the actor would look out the window because he would see the moon, and then the DP would say, oh, rack to the moon, and then rack back to his face. And it was one of those things that you can only get if you're really in a place or in a virtual environment. And those are moments that, you can try to plan those out with green screen or blue screen, but that spontaneity, I think, is really important in finding good filmmaking.
Yeah. The one that I sort of looked to that was just really sort of resonated with me, and it was with Project Arena, but it's honestly just not about project. It's mostly about virtual production in itself. As you know, we were filming a Western, right? So we were doing this Western look, and Richard, our DP, who's a very, very talented person, obviously, and he's worked, under Gordon Willis and some incredible filmmakers from the 70s. And he knew that the Western look we wanted was that old 60s, 70s look. And so we used Panavision vintage P lenses, which is the original ultra speed lenses repurposed in new housing. So it had that old glass, right? That kind of looked beautiful. And there's a shot where the actor comes in and it's a super close up and the hat's there and it's backlit by the LED and there's a bunch of things happening, but it's very dramatic lighting. But there's that very, very vintage chromatic aberration, defocus look that's all happening there. There is no way with a green screen that you would get all of that detail or any of that to happen. And it all happened in camera. It was all live. And it looked way more believable than anything that we could have done.
So. Oh, absolutely. I mean, even just from a lighting perspective, I mean, if you're lighting something with a huge green screen behind it,
right,
you're guessing and you're hoping that the visual effects team is going to be able to match what you did.
Right.
And they can probably match it pretty well, but what if what you did wasn't really right for the end all scene? You know, it's like there's that back and forth that happens and maybe the DP is not a part of it. But here, even if you were going to say, oh, just make the frustum a blue screen, before you do that, you still get to see this is how the light is interacting and it matches perfectly. And, you know,
yeah,
all of those great filmmaking tools.
Yeah, I think it's really cool to sort of think about that. And I think the thing that Richard resonated and is like, oh, right, it's on me now to make sure it looks good. It's not on someone else. I don't pass the buck down, right?
Yes, I love that. I feel like it seems to me that larger movies these days are, you know, movies made by committee. And it's why it's so hard to be artistic. You know, it's there's a group of people saying, well, yeah, but the focus group says we can't do that. And, you know, it's like, yeah, but if I'm a filmmaker, I want to go just make a thing and say something.
Sure.
And we can now do that as independent filmmakers, but have it still be kind of on a larger looking scale.
Right.
I think this opens up the door for so many things. It's like everybody always says, you know, if you can come up with a script that takes place in one room, you can get enough money to make that movie. Well, what if your one room is an LED volume?
Right.
Because now you can go anywhere.
Sure.
And that's I think the dream of independent film, where, you know, the prices for this kind of stuff is coming down by just the nature of the tech is getting older and it's having been used a lot and already utilized and that sort of thing. And, you know, we kind of have a flexible pricing structure here where it's like, oh, look, if you're an independent short film, we're not going to charge you what a, you know, $100 million Disney project is going to be charged.
Sure.
Because we want everybody to have the experience. We want to be able to let people learn this. Otherwise, if producers don't know how to budget for it, if DPs don't know how to light it, then it's going to go out the window. Right.
Well, that's great, and I do want to talk about like those challenges, right? As a person that's managing that, it's not necessarily cheap, right? It's a big upfront expense at this, and there is some sense of what I just built might be obsolete, right? So how do you manage that as a business and do that? Do you say, okay, now I can amortize the cost over time and it gets lower for certain conditions? Like, how do you do that?
It's a really good question. So some of our gear that we purchased specifically for certain shows has already been amortized out. So in those cases, we can, you know, do really good deals because of that aspect of it. You know, we obviously have our overhead, which is our overhead. But you know, the thing for us, I think the initial spirit of what started Orbital, which is that let's make this better. We're constantly doing that. And because of that, brands that are making things, people like you, I mean, people that are making Project Arena, they want people like us to test it. And it's the same thing with the tech, software and tech. So, you know, for instance, we have a partnership with Dell and NVIDIA, and they send us computers and graphics cards and Color Light Processing, who does our video processors. You know, they've swapped us out to the new version for nothing, because they want to be able to say that Orbital has it and they use it and they approve of it. And they hope we approve, and they'll work with us to make it work the best that it can. And so
Sure.
that's helped us a ton, because if we had to continue to upgrade at the speed at which we have been upgrading, we'd be out of business. I mean, you can't just keep buying new LED stages.
Right. Yeah, that is an interesting thing. Like what has been the hardest part of the growth of your company? Has it been the I'm going to now go to this stage because they have a newer panel? Is that what it is, or how do you deal with that?
I think it's been more about the ebbs and flows of our industry as a whole, because last year.
So even like the strikes could affect you, and
the strikes were pretty bad. We still were able to do some commercials, but a lot of production just kind of slowed down, especially for us. Television just kind of died.
Right.
And then there's just the seasonality of it too. We're going gangbusters for a few months, and then all of a sudden it dies, and you're like, what's going on? It's like, everybody's on vacation. It's like, all
yes.
right, I guess we'll take a vacation too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I say that's the big thing. The second biggest thing is probably education. You can have a really overzealous DP who really wants to use it, but the producer says no because they don't know how to budget for it.
Right.
Or vice versa. We've worked with producers that really love it and DPs that were like, I don't want to learn this new thing.
Right.
And either way can be detrimental to the project.
Sure. And what about dealing with visual effects studios? How has that been? Because you said you're not associated with and you're not doing that. So how do you manage that? Because obviously you have to be able to sort of work with them in some ways, because there is probably some data exchange that needs to happen of some kind, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we have several virtual art department partners.
Sure.
Rotu and Narwhal, and from some of the larger companies like a Pixamondo or ILM.
Right.
It's really just that setting up of the system, whichever system they use, whether it's Shot Grid or whatever it's called now.
Right.
Just to get everybody the assets as they need it. The biggest thing for outputting for us is usually the tracking data,
right? Because
they can get the Unreal scenes pretty easily from whoever did the VAD, but all that tracking data is super important. So, but I mean, it hasn't been a difficult process. I'd say maybe some of the smaller companies that we deal with for commercials, where they're coming in and maybe they've done Unreal work in video games, but they don't really understand the level of optimization that has to be done. And they kind of set up the project in a way that's damn near impossible, and then we have to kind of start over. Or, this is an interesting one, and this is something I bet you every stage deals with. We're dealing with the production company that got the job for a commercial. Right?
Okay.
So to us, they're the client.
Right.
So we create the virtual art department based on their thoughts and notes, and it has to get signed off on, and then we optimize it and it's ready for the stage.
Right.
Their client comes on the day, and then they want to make changes, and they can, but it's going to slow us down. And we've done all these things to try to mitigate that from a tech perspective. But at the end of the day, we have to change that process where the client has to be collaborative earlier on.
Right.
Even if they don't make a decision, they just have to tell us, it's kind of like if you had art department and you've got 50 different kinds of vases because you don't know which vase they're going to want to use on set. Well, we need those 50 vases in our scene so that they're ready to be put out there. Because if you want to add one later, it's going to take us 20 minutes.
Right.
Which is a huge waste of time, on set, obviously.
Yeah, I do think you're right. It is a waste of time. I think that it's interesting because it always comes down to decisions, right? Who's making the decision and how long is it going to take to change that decision? And it is very interesting that we'll fix it in post was a way to just shove it down the line, right? It was always like, we'll just deal with that later because I just want to keep moving forward and I'll pretend that it's going to happen at some other point. But now you're fixing it in pre, which is the big thing that everyone's talking about. But at the same time, do you feel that once they've shot it, they are good with it? Or do they still say, yeah, you know what, let's make a green screen here because I'm going to fix this later somehow because I can't make that decision?
Yeah, I think especially for commercials, they like a lot of flexibility because the client tends to be the last person in the room and the first one with thoughts. And so we'll do, if we know we have a client like that, we'll do multiple takes where we get all of the potential things that they want. So we'll do a green screen pass,
Sure.
just so that they have it. We've had commercials where we like fully replaced, because we have the tracking data, just fully replaced what was on the wall because they changed the car that was going to be in the commercial.
Okay.
You know, there have been, you know, I think that the good news is with the latest tech and the latest software, as you know, you can almost do anything a lot easier than we used to do it.
Sure.
We don't like to tell clients that because we'd rather you make a decision because you're going to have a better product at the end of the day.
Yes.
Once you start, you know, messing with something, you're just going to keep messing with it until it's a crumbled up piece of paper. So,
right.
Yeah, not ideal, but yes, we can make changes.
Yeah, it's interesting. What about the world of the digital backlot? Like, how does that work, right? Like in terms of, okay, now give me a tree, and now give me that. Like having like your digital prop department, your digital like available to you. It's just kind of an interesting world, right? To sort of have that idea there.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a game changer, and I think for us, while it's possible, and we've certainly done it where we're literally creating new virtual art on the day while we're shooting, we like to have as much of that figured out in advance as possible, just because, you know, it's just less time to waste. I mean, it's one thing to be sitting there and going, you know, I thought that wall was going to look good, but it doesn't look good. Can we put a tree in front of it? Like, totally, no problem. That's fine. It's like,
sure.
But if we're saying, you know, I didn't know we weren't going to have traffic in this scene. It's like, well, that's kind of important. It's not something we can just dial up for you right now. So,
right.
Yeah. So we're not, you know, we're not perfect, but we're always trying to help encourage the filmmakers to make those decisions as early as possible.
Yeah, I do remember, and this is ages and ages ago, but it was someone who told me who was working on the film Polar Express, and they were saying basically like, yeah, I like this shot. He's like, but you know what, that tree back there, there's way too many Christmas balls on it. It's very distracting. Can we take out like 5 Christmas balls? And I said, sure, no problem. When can I see it again? It's like, it'll be 7 days until you can see that again. And just the idea that like, of how long and it's not necessarily a huge amount of work. It's just the concept of going down that pipeline takes forever, that just removing 5 Christmas balls would take 7 days to see it again.
Speaking of Polar Express, I mean, you know, these are the guys that basically developed half of this technology.
Right. Yeah.
And imagine that today you could make Polar Express in like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because you could literally have the actors perform with a video camera and run it into Engine and see it live and change as many Christmas balls as you want.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty amazing how far it's come, how fast.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I am curious to hear. I mean, obviously, you know, James Blevins came to you and say, I want to talk to you about these guys at Chaos doing Project Arena, and you know, and we were able to shoot it there. I know you weren't necessarily there for the shoot, but nonetheless, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Like, what were your thoughts when he said what these guys are doing and what we're interested in doing?
Well, I'll start by saying that as a Maya artist, I've been using V-Ray as long as V-Ray's been around.
Okay.
And was always a huge fan of it. Always the problem for me was how long it took me to render out something
sure.
that looked, you know, because what was amazing was how great it looked when you could render it out. But
Right.
it just took forever, with all of that, just because of computing power and stuff.
Sure.
But to see basically a V-Ray render live on a stage is pretty spectacular.
Right.
And yeah, I think I only saw one. I think I saw right when you guys were rapping. I saw kind of a moving down the street
Right.
shot, and I can't wait to see the short. By the way, but in talking to the team about it, it just seems like it's a really interesting solution for, there are certain clients that are going to be one way and certain clients that are going to be another way. It's like if I have to bake lighting because of
Right.
Unreal, and a filmmaker wants to change that, that's a non-starter, right?
Right.
So this feels like it solves that problem quite readily.
Right.
And so I think it's a great solution for those kinds of things. I really want to see some more projects in it so that I can really start to sink my teeth into it. But yeah, just initially I thought, well, obviously if Vlado's working on it, then it's probably pretty great. So
That's true, and you're right to say that. The thing that was interesting. And again, it doesn't solve every problem, right? And we never claim that it's going to solve every problem, because I still think that virtual production exists in many different forms, and there's going to be many solutions for it. And game engines are still very much a thing that's going to happen. However, I think what our hope was that it would open up the door to be able to get more people to try things without having to do a big shift towards game engines, right?
Oh yeah, and especially if you're a traditional VFX artist and you're not used to working in a game engine,
Right.
You can work directly in your software, correct me if I'm wrong, and just
Yep.
go straight to the wall. So
Yep.
that's pretty huge for like a lot of people like me who are used
Right.
to V-Ray materials and want it to be a certain way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's great.
I think the thing that was the most surprising to me, because we're always looking for feedback, and we don't know, we know what our intended strengths are, but we don't know what some of them could be that we never got as feedback. And one of them was, I think it was Brian that was telling us, he said, the most amazing thing about it to us was the fact that we used it for 3 days solid constantly, and it never crashed.
Yeah, I mean, any computer program, that's a pretty strong
Yeah,
to say.
we did 30 setups on our first day, which was a huge amount.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy.
So to us, it was like, all right, we just nailed all of the train. Can you imagine doing, and actually even just in live action, imagine trying to shoot, an entire 30 setups on a train in one day.
I mean, I wouldn't encourage that. That's why.
No.
No, I mean, the one great thing about using a volume is the fact that you can move the world. So you don't have to move your gear around quite as much. So you
Right.
can save time in that way. And then if the computer program is solid enough where you're not crashing,
Right.
that's amazing. That's, you can get through a ton. I mean, we've done similar things, but with video plates. I don't think we've had a 30 setup day with game
Right.
engine, but I don't know that I ever want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it worked really well, honestly speaking. And I thought, I was very, very excited about it. The thing I liked a lot also about your stage is that your walls get very bright. How bright do your walls get?
Well, it's funny. People ask us that. And we actually asked the manufacturer to reduce the brightness, the overall brightness.
Okay.
So I want to say they're around 850 nits.
That's pretty bright. Yeah.
The traditional panel, I believe, was 1200 nits.
Right.
And when we were doing our initial testing, the first thing we found was that we were dimming it by 50% almost every time.
Interesting.
And what happens is when you dim an LED panel, what you're doing is removing contrast. So the levels that you have between white and black, you dim it by 50%, you've just lost 50% of your contrast.
Gotcha.
So by saying to them, okay, we want to rework this so that the max output is 800 nits,
Right.
because that's a pretty good sweet spot for camera. that way we keep all of our steps and we're not having to dim the wall.
Right.
That was one of the intentional things that we did. I think we also, the pixel pitch is a tighter 1.5 millimeter pitch so that you can get the camera closer and not have to worry about moire. You actually rack focus to the wall in most cases, as long as you're not on a really, really wide lens. And then we operate them at 120 hertz. So essentially they allow for high-speed photography if your assets can hold up to it. Those are kind of the big things as far as the LED go that we made changes to for filmmakers.
Well, the thing that I thought was awesome, I'm going to go back to the train sequence, which we had, is it looked super bright outside, right? And the sun, we did use an actual physical light as the sun to supplement it, because you can't really get sharp shadows from an LED wall, but we still used the light. But nonetheless, the outside sky was totally believable in there. And so when we looked at it, it was like, oh, we're on a train. And in fact, what was interesting was even the actors, when we were sitting there, we all felt like we were on a train because everything looked out. We're looking out the window. Everything's going by. And it was really kind of awesome to experience that. And I remember Ben Hansford, our AD, was basically constantly warning people, don't get on any ladders or do anything because you're going to get dizzy and you're going to fall off the ladder because it really feels like you're on a train. So we were like, it was really kind of a beautiful experience, to be honest. I loved it. It was so cool. And the reason I brought it up is like, that was really bright out there. And if you look at it on the thing, sometimes you look at virtual production shots and you can tell the virtual production shots because everything just kind of looks flat. There's no contrast, like you were saying.
Yeah, that's a huge, of course, because it's what we do. Like I stare at every virtual production thing on TV and just like, I always see it and it drives me nuts, but that's one of the biggest things is that contrast. And there has to be that give and take between the DP and the virtual production supervisor to see it and go, oh, that's where they're at the lens. Let me make an adjustment here for contrast. It's a huge deal. I think the other thing too, that maybe was sort of miseducation early on in the virtual production process. And maybe it's because, the ILM volume is just this big, massive thing with a ceiling and everything. Is that you should use that wall as a light. The wall is really good at reproducing an image, right? Like you said, it looks like the sun, but it doesn't act like the sun, right?
Right.
You still needed a real light. And so the thing that we tell DPs is light it like you were really there. Like you need a light. Don't light it like that's, going to help you. It's going to give you some fill light, and it's going to help, merge the images together. But light it like a cinematographer. Use that control that you have. I think maybe people said, oh, you don't need lights because if I wanted to move a ceiling panel out of an LED volume that has a ceiling cap on it, it's a good couple hour process to get another light in there. Yeah. And they don't want to do it. So one of the things we did was we were like, well, why do we have that ceiling cap? Well, it's for reflections for the Mandalorian. Well, that makes sense. Right. We're not making the Mandalorian.
Right.
We make, mostly things with people that don't have reflective surfaces.
Or helmets that are super shiny.
And if we do have reflective surfaces, it's a car commercial.
Right.
So we built a ceiling panel that was what we needed for a car commercial, made it a super tight pixel pitch so that we could actually, tilt it and put it on whatever angle it needs to be. And then the DP has all this area around there that they can bounce lights in or put lights up. It just gives the DP a lot more freedom.
Yeah, I think that's right. DPs can still be DPs or should still be DPs, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a magic bullet. It's just the right environment. And that was one thing I really appreciated about Richard and what he did is that he wasn't afraid, even though literally we're making a short to showcase virtual production, he wasn't afraid to throw away what was out the window, expose it brightly so that it looked like an outside. And it did. And I think that's what was so cool about it. It's like, just think about it. Don't say, look at the outside environment. Like, no, just look at the actors. That's the important part of what's going on, right?
Yeah, light it like you would light it if you were on the train. Yeah, let's look at the actors. Yeah, No, he's a great DP. I loved having the early conversations with him when I was involved. He had really great questions, and just the couple of shots I did see, I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So I know there's going to be a premiere that I'm hoping you'll be able to come to, and I know that people are going to be excited to see it when it comes out in public. But Dave, definitely check out what you guys have done at Orbital, because I think it's a really great space to look at. But I want to talk a little bit about where you think this is all going, because obviously we know here we are. It's almost like in-camera VFX has now become an established thing, and there's new tools that are out there like Vantage that are sort of enabling new workflows. Where do you see this? You mentioned independent filmmakers, right? This is still like you're going to look independent filmmakers like it's still very expensive for me to do this. Where do you see the next level of virtual production, and how independent filmmakers are going to be able to use it, and how those costs are going to start to come down?
I would say there are already less expensive options out there. Mm-hmm. I think the more zeroed in on your goals as a filmmaker, the smaller the stage you need. There are small stages here in LA that you can rent for $500 an hour.
Right.
So as long as you can fit your vision onto that, there are those options currently. I think the other thing is, people look at the big LED walls and say virtual production, but really virtual production is, as you know, a whole bunch of different tools all just cobbled together. And even just using it with a green screen environment where you're seeing a real-time feedback of the environment mm-hmm. in the monitor, that's a version of virtual production.
Yep.
That plus the advancement of certain AI tools that are making things faster. I just think that
what are the ones that are the most, because obviously we talk a lot about AI on the project, but I want to know from your perspective as someone who's very involved in virtual production side of things, what are the AI tools that you are most excited about, or the ones that you're paying the most attention to right now?
That's a good question. Let me see how I can answer that. We, like with everything, we test everything.
Of course.
And different tools, by the time this podcast comes out, probably one tool will be better than another.
Yeah.
I think for just sort of idea generation, mm-hmm. I've been loving Leonardo. Leonardo's been great. I think Runway has a really good image to video setup. Mm-hmm. For virtual production, right now, the only one that we've actually tested is Kubrick. And it's just now starting to create...
What is Kubrick? Can you explain a little bit what that is and how it works?
Yeah, so essentially, anytime currently when you're generating something in AI, it's mm-hmm. going to be an image.
Sure.
To start with.
Right.
Or I guess a video. But what Kubrick can do is you can generate an image and then tell the image you want it to be put into 3D. Mm. And it's kind of a trick because it's not actually doing it in 3D. What it's doing is, let's say you've got a countryside and you've got a rock right here. Mm-hmm. It just cuts out the rock and moves it forward and then does content-aware fill behind it so that you get some parallax, like 2.5D kind of thing.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Which is really the trick that's been virtual production for the last 4 years, but we don't talk about that.
Yeah, actually, that's true, right? I mean, a lot of virtual production has been just a bunch of floating cards.
Yeah, because it had to be.
Paintings.
Yeah, for it to be optimized enough to run, that was always, when I got into it, I didn't know that. And here I am trying to drive these things to operate
right
at speed and finding out later that they never did before.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
funny. Hard to change lighting on a bunch of matte paintings, by the way.
Exactly. Also true. But basically, the latest version of Kubrick that we've seen is mm-hmm. that it is starting to get a little bit more geometry. So let's say, I think they have an example of a Italian village.
Mm-hmm.
and it's just a plate like this with a street and some houses. It's now taking it and kind of folding it into, maybe 6 or 7 pieces.
Mm.
And it doesn't hold up for the whole move, but it holds up for enough of it for you to go, all right. And in some cases, it's not picking the right things, as far as where it should be
Sure.
in space. But it's a really good start. And the way AI learns, I feel like we're probably like 3 days away from it working. But that was one of the ones that we've been looking at. I think NVIDIA has one that they're working on for 3D objects,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is going to be really interesting because if it ends up as a plugin in software that we're running on a stage,
Yep.
For you to say, hey, I need a hammer sitting on that table back there. It's like, all right, no problem. Boom, here's a hammer.
Right.
So that's pretty interesting. But 3D is right now pretty hard for AI. I think it's really getting great for video, definitely good for photos.
Right.
Probably by the end of this year, we'll have 3D.
What about another problem that you guys have to deal with all the time, and that's tracking? Like, what about tracking?
So we tested multiple tracking solutions, and not to put one over another, but for us, I think we like having flexibility more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, we love OptiTrack.
Yeah.
It just allows us to track anything we want, cameras, people, objects, and turntables. We can put something on a turntable and track the world to it. Our biggest thing that we attacked was latency, because the more locked together your systems are, the more latent they are,
Mm-hmm.
because you can only be as fast as your slowest piece.
Exactly.
So our team, and this started with Mark Paletti, our director of virtual production, who was a stunt coordinator. He wants to be able to do handheld shots, and most stages, like, you cannot do that. There's no way. You almost have a full second of delay.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just started messing around and figuring out, how do we make this faster? And it's kind of a proprietary recipe for us, but it's essentially what's connected together and what's not connected together has gotten us down to 0.04 milliseconds of delay, which is almost non-existent.
0.04 milliseconds?
Yes. So it's pretty good. In our best case, it fluctuates. It depends on a lot of factors. But
in terms of how long it takes to render something, or how long it takes to track something? And tracking something, I'm assuming.
So tracking from the camera to the wall.
Okay. Right.
So yeah, that's, again, because we're all filmmakers and we all want certain things. That was the thing he zeroed in on, and
right.
really made that amazing for us. So
yeah, that's great. That's a really good, obviously, that really good latency, right? And that's the thing that I think is important to say, is like, and I'm not tracking and actual triangulating things the way that OptiTrack does. They've been doing it for decades. They know how to get that really fast and get a really good accuracy. So you're absolutely right. There is a problem of latency. By the way, we shot everything on our short handheld. Just so
nice.
Yeah, we did it all handheld, and that was kind of an important part of that, because, and we did. I think the thing is, because Project Arena was kind of built from the ground up without anything else in there, our latency was actually lower because we didn't have anything else sort of bottlenecking it, right? And like you said, the more things you throw at it, the more opportunities there are for latency.
Totally.
Right.
No, it's funny when you talk about OptiTrack. We had talked to them early on, because most places you go, you see that big, you call it the sea mine, where it's this big ball with the big sticks that come out of it.
Yep.
And that's a real pain in the butt for camera operators, because if they hit it, it messes up all
the whole track's done. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had worked with them when we were back in our Funko Studio days to say, look, we need something that you could hit with a hammer and it's not going to change the tracking.
Right.
So we helped them to develop, or they developed it. We just helped them make it smaller.
Right.
This little box. And it's funny, because the ones we have are 3D printed because they're prototypes.
Uh-huh.
And we've had them for years now. But we just started talking to OptiTrack, I think, a couple weeks ago, and they were like, "You guys use those?" It's like nobody uses those. It's like,
Right.
oh, I'm like, our tracking is really good. They're like, can we come see it?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I should say that like way long ago when I first started at Chaos, which is coming up on 11 years or so, but we were using OptiTrack for our Construct project. And that was the first time we were sort of doing like real-time ray tracing with the Construct thing. But it was like super cool how collaborative and like, yeah, let's try some new stuff they are, right? They are really cool collaborators in that way. But there was, back in those days, you're exactly right. Like I had one of their camera rigs things. It was a virtual camera rig that they had. I forgot what it was called. But it had the little poles on it. And I knocked one of their poles and it was screwed for I had to do it all over again. So, and I did see that big disc that you guys have on there. I was like, boonk, you know, like this thing is like, it's not going anywhere. And it was very solid to have that on there. So I know exactly what you're talking about, which is cool. Well, yeah, so it's very cool. So, okay, so tracking and different information. What about like, you know, there's obviously, you know, a lot of people used to do photogrammetry and stuff. What have you seen interests in things like NERFs or Gaussian splats and things like that in terms of environments?
We've definitely experimented with those.
Right.
We've yet to see results that we were happy with.
Okay.
We still do a lot of photogrammetry, and even the AI helping with the photogrammetry is, you know, does a lot for us.
Sure.
You know, it's one of these things, and we always have this discussion about, you know, when somebody's building something on a computer, on their laptop or, you know, 18-inch monitor, and they bring it to the stage and they go, well, it looked better on my monitor. It's like, well, yeah, my monitor is 15,000 by 3,000 pixels. So,
right.
You know, you're going to have to make it work better. So like some of the stuff you see on, you know, social media where these Gaussian splats really look amazing.
Right.
They do if you're going to look at them on your phone.
Yep.
But, you know, we got to look at them on a thing that's a million times that size.
Right.
So it's just a big difference. If it's going to be really out of focus, then sure, we can probably make it work. But the better thing for us still is photogrammetry.
Interesting to see that. Yeah. But I think that it's interesting, and they both come from similar sources, right? I think they all come from photograph acquisition. I think the advantage, obviously, of Gaussian splats is view-dependent reflections and things of that nature that are a little bit more. So, well, cool. So what is it the thing what are you guys up to next? Like, what's your next thing, right? Where are you guys going from here? What are some things that you guys are excited about starting to share?
So at the end of last year, we got into our own content creation. So we have a TV pilot that we're in post now on called The Museum of Wonder.
Oh, wow.
Which is a really fun show. It's all about creativity. The whole thing shot in a volume, obviously. And it's going to be a real fun, sort of family-friendly, creative show. Other than that, you know, our location-based work is really starting to pick up. We signed with an agency a couple months ago, and you know, now we're kind of getting involved in projects a lot earlier on. So for us, that's great. I think from a where are we going, pushing the technology forward standpoint, we've been doing some really interesting things with motion control robots. We have several of them here now at the studio, and you know, one interesting thing, if say you can't get a game engine or a Project Arena to run a project because of how involved it is, it's got explosions and animations and whatever, and you can't seem to get it down to 24 frames a second. There are ways to still shoot it that we've been doing. So
right. So you shoot it at a lower frame rate and then motion control it the same way that you used to do it in the old days, right?
Well, actually, what we're doing is setting the camera move with the motion control system.
Yep.
Taking it out and rendering it, and then bringing it back to the stage same frame rate. So
Right.
that way you have a final render. Now the thing we're trying to work on is get those final renders faster, so that this is what we're working on with Dell and NVIDIA.
Right.
Because if we can set a camera move, go to lunch, come back and shoot it, now we're in a decent workflow.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we should talk, because that's you can do that with Arena, right? And you can render it offline or with V-Ray or whatever.
Nice. The
same thing, right? You just render it twice. So yeah, we should talk about that, because that's a great idea. I love this idea. Yeah. That's the whole thing for us, is like, you just use the same thing for post, pre, everything. And it's just the same asset, and then you don't have to worry about it. But yeah, that's very interesting. Very cool. Well, listen, AJ, thank you so much for being on and telling us a little bit about Orbital, and very excited to let people know about it. They should definitely go check it out. Obviously, they will see the results of what we did on your stage on our short, which we're excited to say. It's very, very cool that you guys were the first stage to sort of really put Arena in production.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you guys bringing it to us, and I think it would be great to continue to try to help be a development partner and just see where it goes. We like I said, we love all the new stuff, and there's always a different solution for a problem. The answer is never no.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing, right? To think of like, no, we can use this, you can use that, you can use this. It's not always, we always have to be shoehorned into a certain solution to make things happen. So
Totally.
Cool. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Good talking to you.